How's it going, American History 2 students? This is Mr. Bell coming back at you with another video lesson. Today, focusing on your second reading activity and last reading activity of this week. This is day 162 of 180 of a regular school year. This is COVID-19 shutdown day 34. This is your video lesson for Wednesday, May 13th, 2020. Explain détente. This was the Nixon philosophy of accepting communism in Europe. Explain Reagan's Cold War beliefs: peace through strength and trust but verify. Which presidents practiced détente in the Cold War? There were three of them: Nixon, Ford, Carter. Détente failed under Carter when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. The first one, détente, is accepting communism in Europe. That was Nixon and Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. Explain Reagan's Cold War beliefs: peace through strength and trust but verify. Which three presidents practiced détente? Nixon, Ford, Carter. Okay, that's your warm-up for today. Today we're going to do a watch-along for the Cold War reading activity. Before we do, just kind of a brief overview of the Cold War, some key events. The Berlin airlift, in which the Allied forces dropped supplies into East Germany. The Korean War, in which we, with help of the UN, intervened and prevented North Korea from taking over South and becoming communist. We helped end the Civil War in Korea. Bay of Pigs, where Kennedy tried to have Castro assassinated. It failed. Cuban Missile Crisis, where Kennedy averted a nuclear war, what would have been World War III, because of a naval blockade. The Chinese Civil War, in which Mao, the communist, ousted Chiang Kai-shek. And then, of course, there's a bunch of stuff in here as I zip through this PowerPoint, which you've already been over. And you really have Reagan, who ends the Cold War by forcing the Soviets to spend not only on their military, but communism, trying to keep everybody up, and it just doesn't work. They can't keep up because we're just spending on the military, whereas they spend on military and trying to provide everything for every one of their citizens. So as we kind of, there's still things like the Vietnam War we're going to talk about regarding the Cold War, but for the most part we've covered the brunt of it. So I've chosen to do a reading activity on the overall Cold War, which you can find here. Now, if you pull up this activity, there's a timeline. That's kind of what we just did through the notes, so no need to look at that. Document A is the Iron Curtain speech from Winston Churchill, and we'll get to that in a minute. Document B is the Truman Doctrine. If you remember, the Iron Curtain speech was when Churchill said that communism would spread throughout Europe like an iron curtain at the beginning of the Cold War. The Truman Doctrine was a belief that we should give aid to countries so that they do not fall to communism, specifically in Greece. And if you pull up these are both things that we have talked about, just to reference the notes here. I know I keep going back and forth. They're at the beginning of Unit 5, Part 2. Iron Curtain, phrase coined by Churchill referring to the split in Europe between democratic and communist nations. Truman Doctrine, military and economic aid to Greece and Turkey so they do not fall to communism. Then Eisenhower extends that to the Middle East. The presidential doctrine is a president's beliefs when it comes to foreign policy or dealing with other nations. And then you have document C. We're not worried about the ambassador telegram. We're not worried about D, Henry Wallace. So we're going to focus on A, the Iron Curtain speech, and B, the Truman Doctrine. So let's go through A. So this is an excerpt from the Iron Curtain speech delivered by Winston Churchill, March 1946, Fulton, Missouri. So he's in the United States giving this speech. Probably no coincidence, as he wants us to step up big against communism. It is my duty, however, to place before you certain facts about the present position in Europe. From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. Behind that line lie all the capitals of the ancient statues of Central and Eastern Europe. Warsaw, which is in Poland, Berlin, Prague, Vienna, Budapest, Belgrade, Bucharest, and Sofia. All these famous cities and the populations around them lie in what I must call the Soviet sphere, and all are subject in one form or another, not only to the Soviet influence, but to a very much high and in some cases increasing measure of control from Moscow. So I'm going to pull up here for you map of Soviet expansion. I think it will help you to see this, just to show you what all they're going to take over. Okay, there's Russia. You see how they began to take over everything in this area of Europe: Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Ukraine. And the fear is that here's East Germany. So there would be the Berlin Wall. So the fear here is that this red is going to get darker and darker, and it's going to spread across the globe. When you think about that communism, while not Russian, is also spread in Southeast Asia, in China with Mao, and in North Korea with the Uns. So you got to keep that in mind. So I think that map does a good job of kind of showing the metaphorical Iron Curtain. So we're on the third paragraph here. In a great number of countries far from the Russian frontiers and throughout the world, communist fifth columns are established and work in complete unity and absolute obedience to the directions they receive from the communist leader. At this time, it would have been Stalin. I do not believe that Soviet Russia desires war. What they desire is the fruits of war and the indefinite expansion of the power and doctrines. Well, we would assume they wouldn't desire war, because this is the time of mad, where they have nukes, we have nukes, you'd have mutual assured destruction. They nuke us, we nuke them. But what we have to consider here today, while time remains, is the permanent prevention of war and the establishment of conditions of freedom and democracy as rapidly as possible in all countries. So how can we stop this Iron Curtain from gaining any new territory? So that is the Iron Curtain speech. The British perspective, if you will, even though he's in Missouri giving that speech. Document B, the Truman Doctrine. Excerpt from the Truman Doctrine speech delivered to from President Truman to Congress on March 12, 1947. This is a big deal. He's calling a joint session of Congress. The United States has received, first paragraph, from the Greek government an urgent appeal for financial and economic assistance. Greece is in desperate need of financial and economic assistance to enable it to resume purchases of food, clothing, fuel, and seeds. The very existence of the Greek state, second paragraph, today is threatened by terrorist activities of several thousand armed men led by communists who defy the government's authority. So they're teetering on the edge of communism. We want to aid them and show what American democracy is capable of and convince them to come our way rather than the Soviet way. Greece must have assistance if it is to become a self-supporting and self-respecting democracy. The United States must supply this assistance. No other nation is willing and able to provide the necessary support for a democratic Greek government. Next paragraph. One of the primary objectives of the foreign policy of the United States is the creation of conditions in which we and other nations will be able to work out a way of life free from coercion, pressure put on from military. Usually coercion's usually part of totalitarianism, using your military to convince people to do things they don't want to do. It is necessary, next paragraph, only to glance at a map to realize the survival and integrity of the Greek nation are of grave importance in a much wider situation. If Greece should fall under the control of an armed minority, the effect upon its neighbor Turkey would be immediate and serious. Confusion and disorder might well spread throughout the entire Middle East. In other words, they're worried about oil. They do not want the communists to get that oil in the Middle East, where the world's oil supply derives itself from. I don't need to tell you why oil is important. It makes the economy go, usually. Not when you're shut down like we are now, but usually. And that's when they invade Afghanistan. Detente falls apart under Carter. Should we fail to aid Greece and Turkey in this fateful hour, the effect will be far-reaching to the west as well as to the east. The free peoples of the world look up for support. That's kind of the city on the hill thing. In maintaining their freedoms. If we falter in our leadership, we may endanger the peace of the world, and we shall surely endanger the welfare of this nation. Great responsibilities have been placed upon us, as we finish the last paragraph here, by the swift movements of events. That Soviet expansion that we pulled up on the Google map there. Just via Wikipedia, but I just kind of want to pull up that map there so you guys can see it one more time. Okay, I'm going to minimize that. So you're focusing on B and C. Sorry, A and B. A and B. Sorry if I said C. Not worrying about C, not worrying about D. So you have a total of 5 questions. I will leave it up to you which one you want to answer. So if you want to do the Iron Curtain speech and answer 1 and 2, you can. If you want to do the Truman Doctrine and answer 1 and 3, you can. That way it's even, you're not having to answer 3 if you choose Truman. So either if you watch this watch along on YouTube, do the Iron Curtain speech and answer 1 and 2, or you don't have to do both. Remember, R-O-R. Do 1 and 3 from the Truman Doctrine, and don't worry about this here. And again, we're ignoring all of this. So hopefully this watch along has helped you in this reading activity. If you have any questions about it, please email me at bsbell@clevelandcountyschools.org. Thank you. Stay safe.